Hello and welcome to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiaga. As always, joining you today on March 19th, 2024. Special shout out to my dad. It's his birthday today. I don't know how old he's turning, but he's old. He's old. He's turning older. So special shout out to him and on his birthday today. But regardless, I have a great show planned for you guys today. A lot of interesting topics. Breaking news relatively, because heading into this, I had planned a story, but things changed. Then I'm bringing that to you guys on today's episode, as well as Deion Sanders and his comments that he made on his son, Shedeur Sanders, and where he would love to see him play in 2025, as well as the Arizona Cardinals adding some new luxury stuff to their stadium. Very exciting stuff that I'm very excited to talk about. The Chargers losing two of their best wide receivers and what that indicates on where this team is heading in terms of identity under Jim Harbaugh. And Mike Williams officially signing with the New York Jets today on a one-year deal. I'll get into all of that. All of that coming up on today's show. But before I get into all the news and stuff like that, I want to remind you guys, if you have any questions, comments, or anything like that, to please use the tip and donations link running across the ticker below me at gsmcpodcast.net. It makes sure that I'm able to see your question, read it out loud on air, and it makes it more of a discussion, a conversation, which is always better in my opinion. So if you would, please use the tip and donations link, gsmcpodcast.net, with any of your questions. We always appreciate it at GSMC Sports Network anytime you guys are able to do that. Going on to the first story, the chip shot story, as always, has to do with Deion Sanders and his son, Shedeur Sanders. A great performance this past season in college football for the University of Colorado. Shedeur Sanders obviously making a lot of headlines, being one of the top, you could say, younger quarterbacks in college football this past season. Very exciting style of play. A lot of eyeballs drawn in because it's Deion, because it's its son, and these new players coming over to the University of Colorado. But now Shedeur Sanders is heading into what is most likely his final season in college football, and a lot of people are going to start talking about where he's going, where he wants to get drafted, which teams are interested, which teams will be in the top 3, top 5, or top 10 to where they could have the opportunity to draft Shedeur Sanders. But for all those teams, it better be somewhere warm because his father, Deion Sanders, prime time, is not happy about him potentially going to a cold weather city. He said it in some comments recently. He was on the SiriusXM's Mad Dog Radio with Chris Russo, and they were talking about this year's draft class, specifically Caleb Williams. In a part of that interview, they were talking about him, getting drafted number 1 overall, most likely to the Chicago Bears. And it came up to a point in the discussion where, they were talking about Caleb, obviously coming from USC, and that transition from warm weather, always sunny, great climate in California, to shifting that over to Chicago and basically always being in the cold, one of the earlier places to play where it turns colder earlier. So Prime made it an emphasis to talk about that, and in his part of the interview, he said, in regards to his son and kind of comparing the two situations with Caleb, he said, I don't want my kid going nowhere cold next year. He grew up in Texas. He played in Jackson, Mississippi, played in Colorado. Season's over before it gets cold in Colorado. I'm just thinking way ahead. I don't want that for him. And if you know anything about Deion Sanders and just the way that he is, he's never shy about saying anything, about saying how he feels. He'll let you know. And just in any of his press conferences that you see him in the interviews, he's always himself, very, very much himself, very admirable. I think it makes it very entertaining. But in this instance, saying that about his son, a lot of people might think that could be off-putting by Deion Sanders in saying something like that about his son, especially heading into this season where he's coming off a great year where he put up numbers like almost 70% completion percentage, almost 3,300 yards over the air, 27 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions. Outstanding numbers for Shedeur Sanders. Only makes this next season that much more important because now you have standards to live up to, other than the fact that your dad is coaching the team and there's always attention on you. Your dad's one of the best players in the NFL. This season has to do more with him and how he projects his future going forward in the NFL. Teams are going to be looking at him more precisely, more in-depth, breaking down his game because a lot of these teams are going to be in position to draft another quarterback next year, most likely. So he now has to not only live up to that expectation and those numbers, he has to live up to, his father, his dad saying things like this. And it's not anything new for Shedeur, I'm sure, always being around his dad and having him coach him basically all of his life and stuff like that. He's used to it. He's also not shy about saying what he feels or being a little boisterous and saying things, showing off, everything with the watch and stuff like that. All of that is in good fun. I really enjoy seeing that. I think it's entertaining. It adds another layer to these games. But I think it shouldn't be skimmed over that saying things like this, some teams might think or make a big deal out of it and think, oh, we're going to have to deal with this. This outside noise is only just going to add to more distractions when you're trying to run a team with a young quarterback like Shedeur Sanders. These comments almost always never sit well with front office members, GMs, coaches like that. If Deion isn't shy about saying anything about his son, he's certainly not going to be shy about throwing some shade on some players, the team. If his son gets drafted anywhere high, I'm sure he won't be shy about saying anything if he doesn't like it. Now, he is Deion Sanders. He does have a right to say that. He knows football. There's not a lot of people who can say they know more football than Deion Sanders, but with that comes the more added pressure from the team, from other fans that might not like it. So there's that one aspect. But I think a lot of these teams, could look past that. And I think they should look past that because you're talking about a kid that's already looking very special. And quite frankly, it's just talk. It's not like Deion is going with anything further. It's not like he's in his son's ear talking bad about the team or maybe influencing him in that way to get his way out of the team. I don't think he'd ever do something like that. It's just talk. He's a dad. He can say things like that. No relative, really, in the NFL, we haven't seen a relative be shy about saying things like that. I was on here talking about Dak Prescott's brother and him saying stuff like that. Brandon Ayuk had some relatives saying stuff about him and the team in the Super Bowl, not using him as he felt that he should be used. You always have parents saying stuff like that. It carries more weight because it is Deion Sanders, but I think a lot of teams shouldn't really pay attention to that. It's not something that should be that important in all honesty. If you just focus on it, if you're the coach, just making sure Shedeur is getting supported and is put in a position to win, I think that's the best they can do, and just ignore all this talk from parents and players or former players like Deion Sanders. And it raises another topic or another aspect of this new generation, I think, of college players, younger players coming in. Obviously, with NIL, players get more power now in deciding where they want to go, transferring, trying to find the best financial situation for them. If that's good or bad for college football and amateurism and stuff like that, that's discussions other people have. But the fact is that these players are now getting more power because of that. They feel more, you could say, entitled to some aspect, a lot of them, because they feel that their name, image, and likeness carries a lot of weight. So now they feel more power in their voice to make big decisions like this. And I think we're going to see more players coming out. You're seeing it now with Caleb Williams talking the way he did in or at the combine, sounding very arrogant to some people, but very confident in my eyes because, he's coming from a place where people are trying to get him to sign NIL deals. People want him. People are after him for his name, image, and likeness and stuff like that. So I think he now feels that his voice carries a lot more weight. He feels more confident, more assured in himself that he carries more weight now with these other teams and with these companies reaching out to him, that he feels no pressure or no wrongdoing feeling that not participating in the combine is going to hurt him in any way, because he knows that teams, brands, and all these people want him to play on their team because of his talents on the field as well, but his name carries weight. And with NIL getting more attention and growing more and more, I think we're going to see more people, more players be more outspoken and take radical decisions that we haven't seen in the past, where everyone played it by the rules, played it the traditional way. I think we're going to see that grow more and more, and it helps in some aspect positively that you have personalities like Deion Sanders in college football drawing more attention to it. But on the flip side, you have these players as well with NIL being more outspoken. And if you think that's a bad thing, that's your opinion, that you're entitled to that opinion. It can get to a point where I think it is bad for the game, but if it goes as far as Caleb Williams has taken it, or these players just voicing how they feel, I don't think there's a problem with that. It only becomes a problem when it goes further and now it's affecting their play. They're deciding, I don't know. A lot of talk has been made about Caleb Williams pulling an Eli Manning and not wanting to get drafted to the Chicago Bears. Taking it that far, I think, could be a problem, but if he's not participating in the combine, or if he's saying, I prefer to get drafted here, here, and here, I don't think that's a problem. But when it affects their play, I think it becomes a bit sensitive and people will take it the wrong way, more so than this talk about, I want to play in warm weather because I just like it better. I'm going to live in this city, so I want it to be somewhere where I actually want to live and play. All that stuff matters. Deion pointed that out. It matters to these young kids where they're going to start their new life and all these things like that. And it makes sense. And I don't think this story should go further than, Deion said it. It's interesting. I don't think teams should take it too personally, too serious. And he's going to continue to say it. So if teams are annoyed by it, they're probably going to have to get used to it, because Deion's not going to shy away about making these sort of comments when Shedeur is in the league. But that was that. I thought it was pretty funny that he said it, and we're going to see how it all plays out when Shedeur Sanders gets eventually drafted. I think he'll be a high draft pick, but this upcoming season for him is going to be pivotal in where he lands, where his draft stock goes, and all that stuff like that. But moving forward now with the show, I'm going to send it to a quick break here, the first one of the show. And when I come back, I'm going to talk about the Arizona Cardinals off the field situation and them upgrading their stadium, a never-before-seen addition to an NFL stadium that has me very excited, and I'm excited to bring it to you guys and tell you guys all about that, as well as Mike Williams signing with the New York Jets, and a deeper discussion on the Los Angeles Chargers and if they made the right decision and going all in on their defense or not under new head coach Jim Harbaugh. So stick around. All of that information is coming to you guys right here on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't replace all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I
lose your shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Back here on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to talk further about the Arizona Cardinals and what they're doing with their stadium. The State Farm Field is the name of it. I could have butchered that. We're going to move past that. I'm pretty sure it's a State Farm Stadium. Yeah, it's a State Farm Stadium. New additions coming to the Arizona Cardinals field. Very luxury additions. When I saw this article and all the news being posted about it on social media and everywhere else, the videos look very, very cool of how it's all supposed to look and the layout of it. I thought it was awesome that this was coming to an NFL stadium and something never before seen. The Casitas new additions to the NFL field, to the NFL stadium for the Arizona Cardinals is my favorite part of it. That's the part that's never before been done in an NFL stadium. So to jump right into it, overall, the general news about this is that they're going to have 6 different types of luxury seating offerings for fans at their stadium. All are going to be on field level, around the sidelines, and in the end zones a bit further when you're talking about the end zone seatings. But they were all announced yesterday, and there's also going to be 2 field level clubs that will also be added. And with all these new additions, everything should be ready for the start of the 2024 season. So that's a good thing for fans that have seen this news and are excited about it. All those 6 different types of luxury additions I'm going to get into. The first one's, like I mentioned, the Casitas luxury seating at the stadium for the Arizona Cardinals. Basically, it's, in their words, in the Arizona Cardinals' words of their announcement, they said it's the NFL equivalent of a beachfront property. According to them, a 2-story custom-designed structure just behind the south end zone. It can accommodate 20 people or less. Obviously, you can watch the game from the Casitas front porch, their rooftop deck, or their furnished interior. I don't have the video of it and stuff like that or pictures of it, but if you go look it up, I'm sure you'll find it. It looks very new, very innovative. I'm a big fan of it just because of the fact that it looks pretty cool. This 2-story mini home that you have on the field level where you could host or accommodate 20 people. And I think from my memory, just seeing the video, I think there's about 4 or 6 of them all lined up there on the south side of the stadium in the south end zone. So you think about it, 20 people, 6 or 4 homes. That's a lot of people just sitting in there. And they also have behind that the Garden Casita Club behind it, a private club behind the 2-story structures. And that one's also interesting because that one opens around 3 hours before kickoff. And it's located, like I mentioned, a few feet away from the home locker room where the players walk out. The entrance is just right there, right next to this club. And it makes it that much better. You can see the players walk out, get high fives and everything like that, interact with them because it is really close. It is right there, right outside the doors of the Cardinals locker room. So that's another pretty interesting and just awesome addition to their stadium. Further along, they also have new field boxes located on the east and west sidelines on also the south side of the field. That one's a bit smaller, fit 4 to 6 people, but it has TV screens and fully guaranteed food and stuff like that being brought to you at these field boxes. So that's another one. They have the field suites at the north end of the stadium. Those are a bit bigger. Around the 20-yard line of the north end of the stadium, that one can fit around 12 guests, and it's basically the same as the field boxes, just a little bit bigger. And more so again on the sidelines of the stadium. They have the tunnel suites, basically the same thing, can fit about 12 guests at those seatings right near the tunnel. Another different viewpoint of the stadium, of the game. So that's always great for the Cardinals and all their fans that want to sit in the tunnel suites. Going further along, they have the end zone field seats just a few feet away from the end zone. Almost like, I want to say the Cowboys stadium where they have those field level, a little bit lower seating at their stadium where the fans or people that can afford those seating sit right near the end zones. Also, just watching baseball a little bit, seeing it, I think at the Texas Ranger Stadium, they have the field level, and then behind, I want to say home plate, they have that other seating where it's a little bit below field level, it seems, and they have that viewpoint from there. Similar to that, but this is obviously not lower. It's on field level. They're right there with the players if they want to come over and celebrate, making the whole experience a lot better for the fans. Moving on with the new additions, they also have the sideline field seats, which I think are probably the biggest ones of the new additions. They reach from the corner of the end zone to the 10-yard line, and it's just like a big corner seating of the whole stadium on field level. It looks really interesting and awesome in the video. I, again, recommend you guys to go watch that on social media or just looking it up on the internet. It's super cool the way that they break it down, and that's another one. And just in terms of the clubs, like I mentioned the Garden Casita Club behind the Casita structures. There's also the Morgan Athletic Club, rounding out the last of these new additions. That one is more of an inside type of bar club inside the stadium, but it has an opening right outside the club, and if you just walk a few feet, you can walk out the tunnel and just see this big opening to the whole other field level seating that are available at the State Farm Stadium. So that's all the new additions to this stadium. I thought it was awesome, not only, like I mentioned, with all these things being brought into the Arizona Cardinals Stadium. Their COO, Jeremy Walls, also commented on these new additions and just his reaction on it. He said, let me be very clear. This project is the result of the specific vision and direction of Michael Bidwill, the team owner, president, and chairman, Jeremy Walls said. And moving on with that, he praised them further for always trying to be innovative, trying to change their stadium. This stadium has been open since 2006, and there's been multiple Super Bowls hosted there. They've continuously tried to upgrade it and make it more innovative, make it just a spectacle for the fans to come and watch the team, because obviously that's a big point of stadium and the whole fan experience. Regardless if your team's good or not, with all due respect to the Cardinals, they haven't been the best in the last few years, but fans can continue to go and still enjoy the game with all these new stuff coming. It's very smart, obviously, very intelligent for them to do all this stuff. On top of that, they also opened the BetMGM Sportsbook in 2022 at their stadium, and before that season, it was the first sportsbook at an NFL stadium. In 2022, you think about it, I thought it was interesting just because, betting's been around sports and everything like that. They've always been intertwined for so long. To see the first sportsbook just open at an NFL stadium for the first time just a few years ago was pretty surprising to me. But again, State Farm Stadium was the first place to have a sportsbook open at their place, adding even more to the fan experience and the fan enjoyment, regardless if your team's playing well or not. And just based on Team Marketing Report in their annual fan cost index, the Cardinals already had the NFL's most affordable game day fan experience last season. And with all these new luxury additions coming in, a lot of people might think that the prices are going to be much less affordable for fans, but Jeremy Walls, their COO, and as well as Michael Bidwill stressed that it still wanted to keep it like that for the fans. You can't get any better than that, really. The Cardinals already having the most affordable fan experience and adding all these new attractions. I think it's going to be great for the Arizona Cardinals. And I keep mentioning, they haven't been great the last few years. They're slowly building a pretty exciting team. They have James Conner there that's still great. I know they just lost Marquise Brown, but they sit at number 4 where they can get a receiver, a Marvin Harrison, Malik Neighbors, Rome Odunze, whoever they like at that spot. None of the top 3 players or none of the top 3 teams are going to draft a wide receiver, almost 100% that they won't. So they're going to have their pickings at whichever wide receiver they want, or they could trade back a few spots if they want, because there is a lot of depth in this wide receiver class coming into the NFL where they could afford to do that. But I expect them to stay at 4, probably draft Marvin Harrison and add to that young offense. They're still led by Kyler Murray, who played very well towards the end of last season after coming back from that injury. And underrated coaching performance last year, I think, was Jonathan Gannon, their new head coach last year. He did a great job with them, having them stick to their plan, having them stick to his identity and his vision for this team. I think it got better, more competitive as the season went on. You saw them in great games. If my memory serves me right, I'm pretty sure that they beat the Eagles in a game. They might have been the Cowboys as well on top of that. So Jonathan Gannon is doing a great job with them. They're building that product on the field, but off the field, with them adding these new additions, I think it's all coming together in a great recipe for this team and for the fans to culminate into something great going forward in many years to come. I think Jonathan Gannon will stick around for a long time. He's looked great with this team, and they're only going to build on that, building through defense, because he was their defensive coordinator for the Eagles the season before that. I think that's the way to also go. So they're slowly getting there. They're probably not going to be beating down the door of an NFC championship really in the next year or two, but it is exciting for the fans, for this team, to not only see their team get better, make improvements, but also have this stuff off the field where it makes not only their own fans want to come, but it makes everybody else want to tune in and see their games because they want to see some feature stories or some short snippets of these new additions, how it looks, and then it all snowballs from there. Other people see it, they want to come. It draws more people in to this and makes it more of a spectacle for the fans. Just the whole experience of going to a game, regardless if your team wins or loses. If you have a good time, I think that's the best sort of experience you can get. Of course, it helps when your team wins. You don't really lose at all if your team wins. You have a great experience with all these new additions. But with the Cardinals, I think they're going in the right direction, trending in the right direction with these additions. And I'm very excited to see how it looks. Like I mentioned, I'm very excited about these Casitas additions to their stadium. Who knows? Maybe I'll end up there one day. I'd like to. That would be awesome. But regardless of that, that's the way the Cardinals are going, and very exciting times for them on and off the field. And in saying that, I will transition into the next topic after the break. After a second break in this episode, I will talk about Mike Williams signing a 1-year deal with the New York Jets, announced today, just a few hours before it came on the air. I'm going to break that down, what it means for the Jets going forward, and on top of that, sticking with the Chargers and their identity going forward. What kind of indications have their latest moves given us on where this team is trending? Have they foregone the development of Justin Herbert by going all in on their defense? I'm going to talk about that more after the break on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. Don't go anywhere. You're not going to want to miss it.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. Sticking around, talking about Mike Williams and his situation into free agency, or his short stint in free agency, now that he signed a one-year deal with the New York Jets. Like I mentioned, it was just announced a few hours before I came on the air. Very exciting to see that. I always get brightened up when I see these breaking news, and it's always exciting. But I had planned on coming on here and talking about his options. He was supposed to meet with the Panthers, the Jets, and the Steelers later this week, scheduled to be on a Thursday. The Steelers were going to be the last meeting he went to, but he landed in New York, I think, last night or this morning, and he stayed in New York and is staying in New York for the next year, now signing a one-year $15 million deal, $15 million being the max value it can get to. So you don't know really the initial market value of this one-year deal. You can bet that it is based on incentives and how well he performs and probably playing time, because Mike Williams, he's 29 years old, coming off a few injuries. It's a smart deal for the Jets to structure it in that way. So I think the Jets got a real steal here, just in terms of who they're getting. Mike Williams, a very solid player in this league. He had a lot of success with Justin Herbert over in Los Angeles, and now he comes to a similar sort of quarterback in Aaron Rodgers. You could argue probably better at this point in his career, but the biggest thing for the Jets, I talked about it yesterday with their addition of Tyron Smith to solidify their offensive line. I was a big fan of that, and now they addressed the biggest need that I talked about yesterday, which was the wide receiver 2, and bringing in Mike Williams to complement Garrett Wilson. They also have their exciting, young, undrafted wide receiver, Xavier Gibson, who made a lot of people gleam about him last season and how he performed, beating out Mecole Hardman, which sparked all of that debate that I also talked about a few weeks ago. He's also there. So they have a solid trio there with Mike Williams and Garrett Wilson. Obviously, Mike Williams is coming off of an ACL injury that he suffered in Week 3 last year, and there was questions about that, how he was doing, how his rehab was going. But he actually said back in January, I want to say, that he is actually ahead of his rehab schedule of where doctors expected him to be in January. So it looks like he's trending in the right direction, healing a lot faster than a lot of people anticipated. It was never a doubt that he was going to miss a game or two in 2024, but with Mike Williams, you would have hoped to get him in the team integrated earlier than that, and it looks like it's going to play out that way. And now they're going to have some time before, probably training camp, because I do expect them to be healthy before July. He can have time to maybe throw or catch with Aaron Rodgers, get to know each other a little bit better, because now the Jets have almost hit on everything that they needed this offseason. Their O-line is shored up. They got their wide receiver number 2, and they have the number 10 pick in the NFL draft. So now you even have more opportunity open up for this team. You could trade that pick away if you want, or I saw in the latest mock draft, I think by Mel Kiper, that actually dropped today, he had the Jets drafting Brock Bowers from the University of Georgia, just to add even more weapons to that offense. I liked it, but again, I wouldn't be opposed to this New York Jets team trading away that pick now, getting a bit more draft capital and addressing other areas, maybe on the defensive side of the ball if you want, or Brock Bowers isn't the worst option you can get in the top 10. A lot of people have him going earlier than that, but if the Jets can get him at 10, I think to support that point, I think you can't really pass on him, because he's been mocked all over the place. I've seen him from top 5 to in the teens with some of these picks. So I think getting Brock Bowers would be great, but I think the Jets now have more opportunity, which is the biggest thing. And for their franchise quarterback, Aaron Rodgers, you don't want to say time is ticking, but he is getting older. He's coming off of a bad injury for a quarterback. So all those questions that you had around Kirk Cousins and his Achilles injury, you're most likely going to have with Aaron Rodgers. And the Jets address some of these issues that could harm Aaron Rodgers even more or hinder his performance, addressing the O-line. You have a stud running back in Breece Hall now, and Garrett Wilson, if he is double-teamed, now you have other options to look for in Mike Williams, Xavier Gibson, and potentially Brock Bowers. I'm liking what the Jets are doing. They're having a sneaky good offseason, and touching a little bit on the topic before, I thought, quite honestly, I was going to pick the Jets as his best landing spot on the prior topic that I had coming into today. But the Panthers, I thought, weren't that far off of being the best team for Mike Williams. The Steelers were there, but I didn't think the Steelers were going to get anything done. It would have been almost too good to be true in just a week and a half for the Steelers to bring in Justin Fields, Russell Wilson, Patrick Queen, Deshaun Elliott, send away Kenny Pickett, Van Jefferson also coming in. I thought it would have been too much, too good to be true for the Steelers. So I saw them as the last favorable team to get Mike Williams. But I thought the Panthers, the way that they were sort of structuring this offseason, they got some offensive line for Bryce Young. They brought in Deontay Johnson, trading for him. You could keep Adam Thielen around. He had a good start to the season last year, but kind of tailed off towards the end. If they would have brought in Mike Williams, I would have been a big fan of that. And they would have had something cooking over there for Bryce Young a little bit to see that development, that full potential that he would have had in the later half of the year. He had it in spurts, but now it seems that he's obviously going to the New York Jets. It's exciting to see, and now you could start flirting with the idea that with this New York Jets team, where they stand in terms of competing and seeing it out against a Buffalo Bills team that lost a lot of crucial pieces on that defense. You don't know where they stand offensively. There's been talks about Stephon Diggs and maybe him being traded. He's had some cryptic messages lately on, I want to say, Twitter is where I saw it. So you have that situation with them. The Miami Dolphins still are, to me, the biggest threat to them. The Patriots are in full rebuild mode, so they're not really a factor. I think at this point the Jets are looking better than the Buffalo Bills, so they really have the Dolphins right now to compete with. And I keep touching on this idea like I did yesterday with this whole idea that the Jets are Super Bowl contenders. Last year they were pretty fraudulent in that aspect because they really didn't address these issues like the O-line and getting more weapons for Aaron Rodgers. Now I think you could really get to this point and start thinking about what this team could look like in the later months, in a December, January, where they could be playing for meaningful games and meaningful consequences for these games in the playoffs. A bigger point that I wanted to touch on, also Garrett Wilson has done a great job of developing, even when he's been missing that number 2 receiver. A lot of times you might see these players, these highly touted wide receivers, maybe fall off in their second season, not really live up to their expectation, especially if they have no support around them. I think he's done a great job of really putting all those doubts to the side, still performing as a number 1 receiver, even when his quarterback got hurt, even when things weren't going great. He's always a guy that says the right things. He's always looking on the positive side of things. And a lot of times it's hard for a young guy to really be that leader. But with the circumstances that stood last year with this New York Jets team and how badly it all played out, he showed great character to me, and that is a positive sign for the New York Jets going forward. I'm liking what I'm seeing out of their team. And now the biggest thing now for this Jets team and Robert Saleh and Joe Douglas as the general manager is making sure everybody stays healthy. One, because you have an older team now. Like I mentioned, Tyron Smith, Moses coming over from the Baltimore Ravens. Mike Williams, like I mentioned, isn't old at 29, but he also has some injury history. So that's really the only thing they have to monitor, making sure these guys are staying healthy, providing the best amount of themselves and their abilities to this team, because it really only takes one injury for, I think, this thing to fall apart. But you're not going to anticipate injuries happening with this team. And now with these big expectations, it kind of shifts the pressure, the attention now more to off the field with Robert Saleh. Nathaniel Hackett is another one. General Manager Joe Douglas, I think he's relatively safe because he's been aggressive, been proactive in getting these pieces that this team was needing. So I think if things go south, I think he would stick around because he's done more positive than not for this team recently. Whereas Robert Saleh has been around, and coaches are always more expendable than general managers, especially good general managers that have brought in signings like this. Robert Saleh, I think now, a lot of people, I think, will start to talk about it more. He'll be one that a lot of people will look upon as one of the casualties that will fall first if this thing doesn't go the way it should, as well as Nathaniel Hackett because of the situation he was coming from in Denver with Russell Wilson, with Sean Payton saying those crazy comments about him having probably one of the worst coaching regimes that he's ever seen in NFL history. To say that stirred the pot even more. He kind of got shielded away from that, coming over to the Jets and having Aaron Rodgers stick up for him. But now it's also getting to a point where you have Breece Hall, you have a Garrett Wilson, you have a very solid offensive line. Aaron Rodgers is coming in. You sign Mike Williams. You're running out of excuses and places to look at when teams want to find a culprit for things not working out. And I'm sure this team's going to go through growing pains and go through rough stints. And those guys, unfortunately, are going to get the majority of the heat, in my opinion, because of all the talent that they have with this team. There's no reason this team shouldn't be better than it was last year. There's no way they can get worse, because if they get worse somehow, this thing's really going to blow up. I expect them to be a lot better, and I'm excited to see what they look like because I think they've been building something very exciting with young players like I mentioned Garrett Wilson. Sauce Gardner is a stud on the outside on that defensive end, defensive back position on the defensive end of the ball. And Quinnen Williams as well, one of the more underrated, up-and-coming defensive tackles, defensive linemen in the entire NFL. So the Jets maybe won't be the Jets of old that we've seen recently, and we could finally see them get over that hump that they've constantly been stumbling over and falling back down the hill over these past few years. We're going to see how that ends up. But for now, I'm going to send it to the last break of this show. And on the other side of it, I'm going to have a more open discussion on the Chargers and where I see potentially their offense heading and their team identity heading into next season under their new coach, Jim Harbaugh, and really emphasizing that defensive side of the ball. So that's coming up after the last break. Don't go anywhere. That's all coming up on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. back here for the final time on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, diving into the last segment of the show. More of an open topic that I wanted to go over with you guys, where the Chargers are kind of heading under new head coach Jim Harbaugh, and what this offense could look like in 2024. Before I get into all the points and all the sides that I want to get into, one last time, wanted to remind you guys, if you have any questions, comments during this live show, to use the tip and donations link with any of your questions at gsmcpodcast.net. Again, if you're not watching this episode and only listening to it, the tip and donations link is gsmcpodcast.net. We always show a great appreciation to you guys if you're able to do this with any of your questions. It makes the show more enjoyable, and it's always a big help for the network and all the shows other than this one across this platform. So if you guys are able to do that, we always send a big thank you back to you guys for your donations. And rounding that off now with the final topic of today's show, talking about the Chargers and this whole big discussion about, who was going to leave out of the big four, taking up the most salary on this team. Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Khalil Mack, and Joey Bosa. Those were almost taking up half of their salary cap for the Los Angeles Chargers. And they had to meet a deadline, I think, before Friday of last week or Saturday, where they had to get under the salary cap. And we saw Mike Williams be the first to go. He's found a new home. Then, surprisingly, we saw Keenan Allen, the other one to fall for this Los Angeles Chargers team. He was traded away for only a fourth-round pick. I touched on what he said was the reasoning behind that yesterday. And just to recap it a little bit, he was basically the only one out of Bosa and Mack to not agree to a contract restructuring. If that was right or wrong for Keenan Allen to say, no, I don't want to do that, and, help the team out a little bit, that's fine. It's his money, it's his contract, it's his career. He can choose to do that. But where the Chargers stand at this moment, they really didn't have time or really the need to negotiate and, I guess, plea with Keenan Allen to, please lower your salary cap. We don't want to move you. They found a good trade partner with the Chicago Bears. The Chicago Bears jumped on that opportunity to get one of the premier wide receivers to add to their team for a cheap price in a fourth-round pick. I think it obviously made sense for the Chicago Bears. And now the Chargers, again, on this side of the discussion, deciding between offense and defense, they clearly chose defense, and Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa were more open to restructuring their deals. They agreed to restructure their deal, so they, bought in and trusted this vision that Jim Harbaugh was building for this team. So they were able to stay. And unfortunately for Allen and Mike Williams and Justin Herbert, the offense now, if you really look at it, is really lacking now in terms of talent and skill set. I saw somewhere that Justin Herbert, I think it was either 50 or a lot more in terms of percent of his touchdowns went to Austin Eckler, Mike Williams, Keenan Allen, and Gerald Everett also, who signed with the Chicago Bears. All of that target share and success that he had with all those guys are now gone. And you could think that Justin Herbert is now looking around and thinking, where do I stand? Where does my development stand? And all these priorities that seem to be ahead of supporting Justin Herbert. And obviously Jim Harbaugh isn't naive to the fact that he needs to do whatever he can to support Justin Herbert. He's got a franchise quarterback on his team. He's very fortunate to have that because, like we've seen this year, they're very hard to come by, and a lot of teams pay a lot of money and give up a lot of stuff to get a franchise quarterback on their team. So that's not going to be ignored. And I think, fortunately for them, they at least have that number 5 pick to draft a bona fide number 1 receiver. They could get Marvin Harrison, Malik Neighbors, or Rome Odunze with that pick. And if they don't like it, I think a lot of people will give up a lot of draft capital to move into that spot and draft a quarterback, a J.J. McCarthy, a Drake May, if teams like him over McCarthy. A lot of teams are willing to give up a lot of stuff like we've seen already in this free agency period. So they could do that. But just in this free agency, they did bring in some players, which transitions me into what I wanted to talk about and this, topic. They brought in guys like Hayden Hurst, Will Dissly, and Gus Edwards. And like I mentioned, they lost all the exciting, skilled, vertical threats like Keenan Allen, Williams, Eckler. Jalen Guyton is an unrestricted free agent. I thought he played very well for this Chargers team last year. He's really without a team right now, so they could bring him back. I'm sure Herbert would love that. But you look at the guys that they brought in, 2 tight ends, really 2 blocking tight ends, and Gus Edwards, who's a powerful between the tackles sort of runner, and no wide receiver yet for Justin Fields. And what this tells me, what Jim Harbaugh is trying to do with this team, not for sure, but it is looking like he's trying to make this team more of a defensive line, offensive line based team, winning the trenches, winning those nasty battles in between the lines, and not really focusing on vertical offense, 5 wide sort of style offense that a lot of teams have shifted into. I think he's going the opposite way and trying to establish this team as a defensive first, very gritty, just team that you don't like playing against. Everyone knows those teams. The Steelers are one that a lot of people would characterize as that, of wanting to run the ball, establish a tempo through that. The Raiders are another one that comes to mind with Antonio Pierce and his sort of style. I think he's gearing towards that sort of offense. And, with their offense and prioritizing defense, you could look at it as, it makes sense. You could be on board with that. And if you are on board with it, it would make sense because the Chargers defense was bottom 5 last year in yards allowed per game, allowing 363 yards per game. They also allowed the 3rd most passing yards per game at 250, and they were 21st in the NFL in points per game at 23. So, looking at both sides of the ball, defensively, those numbers and those stats are not going to fly with Jim Harbaugh. It's just not. You saw the kind of team that he had, even back with the 49ers, a great defense to establish that offense. And most recently in Michigan, you saw how great and prolific they were on the defensive side of the ball. They ran the heck out of the ball with Blake Corum, and they threw it when they had to. They weren't bad at throwing it, but their identity was that great offensive line, that great defensive line, and building their momentum, building any sort of success that they had based off of their defense. And last year, with those numbers that I just threw out, they gave up a lot of yards and a lot of points per game, and they were able to manage that a little bit with their offense and having all these great players on it. But now, I think focusing more on defense, they're going to try to assure that. But if you look at it from a different aspect and are trying to play devil's advocate, your offense kept you in a lot of games last year. We saw Justin Herbert give his best Superman impression in a lot of those games, and a lot of times it was the other guys like Quentin Johnson and his supporting cast that really didn't step up for him in some of the big games. The biggest one for me that jumps out is the Green Bay Packers game. Quentin Johnson had a wide open touchdown and he just dropped it. That can't happen. It happens, but he was a first round pick and he was drafted to be a great weapon. You can't have those sort of drops, and he didn't have a great first year. You don't write him off, but that is a low point in that moment, and just a moment that you go like, of course that happens. The Chargers were very unlucky in that aspect and were, I think, the losers of probably the most close games in the NFL last year. So they have to, I think now with Jim Harbaugh, focus on that defensive side of the ball where they do have good players, and I don't think they've gotten the most out of those players, which is why Jim Harbaugh brought his defensive coordinator from Michigan in to improve that as well. if he comes close to any amount of success that he had with Michigan, I think they're going to be looking good with Derwin James, Bosa, Mack coming back. They have stars on that side of the ball. I'm a big fan of Asante Samuel Jr. I think he's really good. So they have prominent players. It's just a matter of getting the best out of them. And with this decision to keep Bosa and Mack, you have to ask the question of, Bosa's been injured. He hasn't really performed like he has early in his career. Can you guarantee that you can get that out of him? You better hope that you do, because you lost two of your best players on the offensive side of the ball. And with Khalil Mack, he's coming off of probably one of his most definitely impressive season as a player in the NFL. Can he replicate that? Maybe not to the same number and extent that he did. I forget how many sacks he had. I think it was like 17 and a half or close to that. Can he replicate that getting older now in the later stage of his career? Again, you better hope that he does, because offensively, you've really sacrificed that side of the ball to make sure that this defense has pass rushers that are still, you want to think that they're still good and can still produce for you. And this could look bad, obviously, in hindsight, looking into the season and how it all plays out. But, I think Jim Harbaugh took a gamble. He's been put in this position to make these sort of decisions. And most of all, I think he's just being himself. He is that type of coach, a defensive, established first kind of guy, winning the battles between the trenches and doing all that stuff, the fundamentals to being a successful team. He's that kind of coach, so you got to commend him for being himself and not being afraid of being himself for an organization that he was part of and he deeply cares about. I'm sure of that, so he wouldn't be doing this if he didn't fully believe in it. I'm rooting for Jim Harbaugh. I think this was a great hire for the Chargers and one that they needed to bring in a solid voice, a solid leader in Jim Harbaugh. I think it'll do everyone good, as well as make Justin Herbert a bit better. But looking at it right now, in this moment, a lot of people will question what they do on offense. They have options, but right now they haven't been too active in free agency with that salary cap issue that they have. Now they've fixed it a little bit, but, if you're a fan of them, you kind of want to see them get the ball rolling a little bit, make an exciting signing somewhere to complement this offense, because in their division, the Chargers have Devontae Adams. They just signed Alexander Madison, and it's not breaking news that it's going to change the Raiders into this high, prolific offense, but they've made some moves, added Christian Wilkins as well. The Chiefs are only going to get better, signing Marquise Brown, bringing back Chris Jones. Rashee Rice is up and coming in their wide receiver room. I don't have to mention Travis Kelce or Patrick Mahomes. Their defense is pretty much the same, so you know what you're going to get out of them. The only teams that haven't done much are the Broncos, who just are sitting in a gray area right now. It doesn't look like they know what they're doing. And the Chargers, unfortunately, they've done moves. They've committed to making some of these tough decisions, but, you expect a little bit more out of them. I'm not saying it's over by any means, but I would like to see them start to do a little bit more with this team and push it in a direction offensively where they sign some players, bring in some talent, some exciting news, because I think they can be good. I've been a big supporter of Justin Herbert in the past. I think he's really, really good, up there with the Joe Burrows and the I'm blanking Josh Allen's, as well as the Lamar Jacksons. I think he's that sort of talent, and I wouldn't want to see him get wasted in the Chargers and not really supporting him like they should have. We're going to see where that ends up. That's where the conversation kind of stands. I would love to know where you guys stand on this topic. Do you think the Chargers made the right decision in going more defensively and establishing that first, hindering their offense a little bit? Or are you full panic mode and expect this team to not be able to score points at all and this thing to sort of blow up next year? Leave your comments down below. Engage with it. I always love to know what you guys think about that and where the Chargers are going in the future. it's going to be one of the more interesting teams to see with Jim Harbaugh coming back to the NFL. I'm looking forward to seeing it, and hopefully it works out for them. And in saying that, that pretty much wraps it up for today's episode on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. As always, please remember to subscribe, like, and follow the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Make sure to also follow us on social media on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok for more of this network's content. If you want to see more of me and this show's content specifically, go check out the GSMC Sports Network channel and the GSMC Podcast Network channel for YouTube shorts that I always post every weekday. The full recorded live episodes that happen throughout the week and in weeks past, they're all on there for you guys to rewatch or go check them out for the first time. And individual segment videos from each of the live shows. In case you missed one segment or want to go rewatch a certain segment, it's all on there as well. A reminder to always tune in at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time every weekday for more football conversations and stories around the NFL. From me, your host, as always, Manny Maradiaga, thanking you guys for tuning in to today's episode, and I would love to see you guys all tomorrow.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.